Okay, thank you very much. Now all I have to do is find the clicker. Wait, what was it? Oh, thank you. So today I'll be talking about the importance of paleontology and paleontology outreach in Georgia. And so, what is Georgia paleontology? Millions of years, or even billions of years ago, there's been a lot of geological and tectonic activity in Georgia. And Georgia paleontology is very important. During those millions of years, Georgia was different kinds of environments. Deep, shallow oceans, coastal marine environments, and even swamp-like environments. And because of this, we learn more, and we have a good preservation of some of the fossils that we have here in Georgia. And so because we, different fossil hunters and because of us amateurs go out in the field, we collect fossils, and this is how we know a lot about Georgia paleontology and the geological record here in Georgia. And so if we learn more, if we find more, we will start to learn more about the paleontology of here in Georgia. So these are just a few fossils that have been recovered in Georgia. Here we have over here is a plant fossil from the crab orchid formation. This is Carboniferous in age. Over here we have a Periarchus sand dollar that was collected from the Clinchfield formation. And over here is an Appalachiosaurus tooth. And Appalachiosaurus montgomeryensis is a tyrannosauroid that lived during the late Cretaceous period, and it lived here in Georgia around 70 million years ago. And it was first described in the Demopolis Chalk Formation in Alabama, and it was described by Dr. Thomas Williamson, Dr. Thomas Carr, and of course, Dr. David Schwimmer. Here are just a few other fossils, and the Tellus Museum is a great museum where you can learn a lot about paleontology and a lot about the paleontological record here in Georgia. And these are just a few more fossils we have here. Here we have an Espalaspis brachyphasis trilobite that I actually collected from the Conestoga Shale formation in Murray County, Georgia. Here is an Exogyra ponderosa. This is an ancient oyster that lived during the late Cretaceous period. Here we have an astrocyte sand dollar, a cinder of starfish, the resting place. And so not only is the Georgia paleontology really important, but to understand the fossil record in Georgia, we have to understand the geological record of Georgia as well. And when I grew up in Georgia, there weren't a lot of fossil localities. I grew up in the Piedmont area, and so the only rocks that were close to me were igneous and metamorphic rocks. And I've done a lot of research through looking through the geological record in Georgia, and these are just a couple of rocks. The oldest rock we have in Georgia is the Corbin metagranite, which is 1.2 billion years old. You can see in the description here is GA. GA means giga annum, which simply just means billion years. This is the oldest rock we have here in Georgia. And here we have the, up on the top is an amphibolite with a broken feldspar crystal. And I collected this very close to where I live in Duluth, Georgia. This is created by the deformation of a fault zone over 300 million years ago. And so the deformations we have here is absolutely incredible. We have mountain building events. We have geological events like landslides and things of that nature that happen during the geological record. And so these are some of the ways that I find useful for teaching the public about paleontology. So in 2014, I was able to go in a couple of libraries for the Georgia Mineral Society, and I was able to teach about the Georgia rocks and minerals and some of the geological record we have here in Georgia. I mostly focused on the geological record in Georgia, but I also did focus on the paleontology of some of the fossils that we have here. And so we went into different libraries, and we were able to talk about to the children and to other parents as well about the paleontology and the geology here in Georgia. This was recently in 2017 where I went into my first elementary school, and this was a science tech night, and I was teaching paleontology to children. Basically what I talked about was some of the geological record we have here, going from the oldest fossils that we have to some of the more recent fossils and on the way to human history. And so I basically set the fossils up in geological record from the oldest fossils to the youngest. And this is really exciting. It was my first time teaching for an elementary school, and it was really great. I'm glad I was able to do it. I first started doing lectures for the Georgia Mineral Society back in 2014, And these are just some of the lectures that I've been able to do. Here's my lecture, what I did on the trilobites that I've collected from the Conestoga Shale formation. And I went out in the field and I collected a few samples, and I used a lot of those samples to teach children. Here is a recent lecture that I did for the Georgia Mineral Society, where I talked about paleontologists and geologists of the 18th century, where I basically talked about James Hutton and some of the people and the other scientists who basically built on geology and made what geology is as a science today. This is a lecture from, this is my first lecture at a natural history museum, where I talked about dinosaurs of the South. I talked about the Cretaceous geology and dinosaurs from the southern parts of the United States, from the eastern part of the United States. I specifically touched on dinosaurs from Georgia, North Carolina, Alabama, and Mississippi. And this was at the Fernbank Museum of Natural History, where I talked about dinosaur discoveries of some of the South, of the southern dinosaurs. I also do events as well. This event was at the Fernbank Science Center, where Rick Spears and a couple of other people from the Fernbank Science Center staff allowed me to do lectures and talk about paleontology for their Earth Science Week. And I did this, and it was really cool. I did 2 lectures. One was on trilobites, and the other was on crinoids. And there was a little fossil show that Rick Spears put together, and I was helping the children understand paleontology by Rick Spears' collection. And this is me holding an Allosaurus femur. And this is me talking to young children about geology. This is probably the biggest thing that I've ever done. It's really had a large impact on my life. I talked about on Earth Day of 2017, this is when I was invited to be a keynote speaker for the March for Science. And it was really a large impact where I talked about the importance of paleontology. And another important thing is that I'm also on the autism spectrum. I have Asperger's syndrome. And so I talked about that, and I talked about the importance of autism education and how paleontology has helped me overcome some aspects of being on the autism spectrum. I was able to go into a young child's birthday party, and I was able to help a young child who wanted to be a paleontologist. And so the Atlanta Geological Society recommended me, and I was able to go to a young man's birthday party and present fossils to his birthday party, and he really loved to enjoy it. I'm very confident that this young man will grow up to become a paleontologist. Rick Spears helped me to get this project going. I really wanted to do something that I've been thinking about for a long time, and this was to volunteer. I didn't know where to volunteer exactly. I was thinking about the Fernbank Museum and the Fernbank Science Center, where it was close to me. So I contacted Rick Spears, and he helped me to get Cam's Fossil Jam on the road and up and running. So a few every Saturdays, I go out to the Fernbank Science Center, and I set up fossils from my collection, and I talk about paleontology and geology to the visitors at the Fernbank Science Center. And as you can see, the first time I went there, Dr. Tony Martin from Emory University was able to come, and his wife, and we talked about trace fossils and paleontology. And so there's been a lot of people who really like this. Not a lot of people get to touch real fossils. Not a lot of people have never seen a dinosaur skeleton or a dinosaur bone before. And so me being the person who has an interest in paleontology, to get that, to be able to have that chance for kids to understand what a real fossil looks like instead of looking at a fossil or a fossil display locked up in a case. The fossils are already there for kids to touch, and we all know that kids love to touch things. They're tactile. And so picking things up and wondering what they are for the first time is something that's really a good impression for a kid who has an interest in paleontology. And not just paleontology, but for the natural world. Fossils just it's just not a big thing for paleontology, but it really understands, really explains the natural world. Plants, animals, fossils, rocks. And this is something that kids would love to do at a very early age. So this is something that I love doing. I do a lot of field work. I actually just got back from Alabama a few weeks ago, fossil collecting in the Monteagle and the Bangor Limestone Formation. But I do a lot of field work next to me. Like I said, I don't live in an area where there are a lot of fossiliferous rocks, so I have to deal with the rocks that are around me. And these rocks are igneous and metamorphic. These come from anywhere in the place, and this is me collecting rocks. I usually use these lectures or use these rock samples to teach about structural geology, how rocks bend and break during stress. So this is me in the Brevard Fault Zone, and this is about 300 million years old. No fossils in these rocks, just slick sides and other rocks that have been formed by tectonic activity. And here is a great example of rocks that can bend and break. The blue lines represent how rocks can bend and squeeze under a large amount of pressure. And so I've collected these samples, and I use these samples to, for children and to understand how rocks break and about structural geology. I also went with Bill Montante a few years, I went with him in 2017 and 2016 to the Conestoga Shale formation. And this formation is Cambrian in age. So this is roughly about 497 million years old from the Upper Cambrian. Now there are two portions of the Conestoga Shale formation. You have the older portion, which is 500 million years old, and you have the younger portion, which is very close to the Ordovician, which is 497 million years old. And so I was able to go out in the field, extract and collect trilobites. This was actually my first fossil collecting trip in Georgia, and it really helped me to go out in the field more and do a lot more fossil collecting in the future. And this was a really great trip for me, and I collected a lot of trilobite specimens. In 2015, I was also on my first podcast for a radio show for the Nature's Talk Radio. Ken McKeon is a field paleontologist from the New Mexico Museum of Natural History, and he wanted to interview me about some of the things that I've been doing for paleontology here in Georgia. And he basically sat me down, and we had a really good conversation over the phone, and being on the podcast was something that was really cool. I've never been introduced on a podcast before. In 2015, that was my first time doing that. I've been on other podcasts before. This is my second time being on his podcast. I've also been on a podcast. His name is George Blassing, who used to run a history channel called Jurassic Fight Club on the History Channel, and he wanted to introduce me to him, and it was great. We had a great podcast, and I've been on a couple of podcasts, and they were really fun, and I hope to get to do more in the near future, talking about Georgia paleontology and some of the outreach that I do. I'm also a really good social media advocate. I have a Twitter account and I have a Facebook account, and I do a lot of outreach. Social media is a powerful thing. You get connections that way, and Georgia Paleontology is a great way for social media. I use social media to get the word out there on paleontology and about geology, and I'm contacted with other paleontologists. And so contacting and social media is a really good tool to understand paleontology, to understand and get more connections out there. I also have a YouTube account called Paleo 101, where I discuss paleontology and geology to the general public as well. And these are great organizations. PAG is doing a wonderful job. The Paleontology Association of Georgia, which you here are now, is doing an excellent job getting this grouping off the ground to really push the importance of paleontology here in Georgia. And PAG is doing an absolutely great job. The Paleontological Society is a great organization, and so is the Fossil Project that does a lot of outreach about paleontology and fossil specimens. And so the more we can connect with social media and the more we understand some of these organizations, the better we can give an outreach and understand and explain to the general public why Georgia paleontology is important. And if there's any Q&A questions, I will take some. Yes.
Are there any kinds of outreach venues that you are interested in presenting at that you haven't had the chance to present to yet?
I really want to present a few universities I'm really thinking about doing. I would love to do something like that. So like presenting in colleges and college format is something that I would like to do. Museums, a few museums I would like to do outreach. And, Yeah, I mean, I think the college, really getting colleges out there and learning about, a little bit more about Georgia paleontology is really important for me. Any other questions? Yes?
I have a question. You had mentioned you had gone to Murray County, Stewart County, and done some fossil digs in the past couple of years. Are these places that are open to the public, where families can bring their children to dig for fossils, or is it solely for official scientists?
Well, I haven't been to Stewart County, but I have been to Murray County, Georgia. I guess I'm not exactly sure. The sites that we are is in a remote location, but I'm sure a lot of other people can go and fossil collect here as well. I'm actually probably not going to, I'm not probably the right person to talk about it because I'm not exactly, the kind of person, but there are fossil places that you can go and collect. So if you just,
Georgia?
yes, in Georgia. Thomas Thurman has a great website called Georgia's Fossils, and that has some locations where you can figure out where fossils are. Yes?
I just wanted to question there are several places in Murray County with the cycle formation that are public on the right of way under a bridge, especially in Tibbs Bridge.
Yes.
How did you get into the field of paleontology? Do you have any recommendations for other aspiring paleontologists?
Really great question. How I got into paleontology is a long story. As I mentioned before, I'm on the autism spectrum, and people with autism, they use an anchor, and so I was being bullied a lot in school and throughout my life. And paleontology is basically the escape route. It helped me communicate with other kids. It helped me communicate with where I am right now. And if you have an interest in it, I wouldn't see why you would give up that interest. So how I was into paleontology really started when I was around 3 years old. I got a dinosaur book from my mother's coworker, and I just began reading it. And after that, I watched movies. And I really didn't get into academics until I was probably 14, where I started reading a few scientific papers, and it really opened my eyes to the academic side of paleontology. I went on my first fossil collecting trip in 2016, and when I was in second grade, a really big impression happened on me. Other teachers knew I was interested in dinosaurs, and if I was on my good behavior, there was a fourth grade teacher who introduced me to her fossil collection, and she gave me a crinoid stem, and crinoid is basically the relative of today's sea lilies. They are extinct, well, not the entire class, but some of them are extinct, and she gave me that fossil, and that really opened my eyes to being a paleontologist. And paleontology is really important. It's really important to understand the Earth's past and understand deep time, and I find paleontology really extremely important, especially deep time. That's kind of where I specialize, is in deep time. Deep time is the vast expanse of geological time recorded in the Earth's rocks. And I like to think of myself and call myself a time traveler, because that's exactly what I am. That's exactly what every geologist and paleontologist is. We're time travelers. And because of that, we have to look at the rock outcrops. We have to look what the past is telling us. And so if you love it, if it's something that you're really interested in, go for it. Don't let anything stop you. I haven't let anything stop me so far. So if you have an interest in it, get all the books you can, read all the papers you can, and absolutely follow your dreams.
And that is a great way to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Cam. Good job.